All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Good. Awesome. Well, welcome to our mental health community in the middle of July. And on a weekend where we're honoring Pastor Tom and all that. I don't know how many of you filled up on chocolate chip cookies out there, but we've got more in here. So, next month we'll talk about, food and all that. No, I'm teasing. But anyways, we're glad that you're here. And if you want to, feel free to take a seat anywhere you'd like. Just a few things as we get started. We have some food, obviously, over there in the corner. You got snacks on your table. We got some cookies and other things over there. We've got water and coffee in the back. For those of you who want to know where the bathroom is, right? That's one of the number one questions we get. It is right below us. If you go down the stairs out there, it's literally down below on this side, all right? So that's where the restrooms are. A few other things on your table. You'll notice that we have a resource list here where our speaker, Wendell, has recommended some resources based on some things he'll talk about today. There's also an agenda on there where you'll see our discussion questions for the start, as well as a place to take some notes. Now, another thing that we have is there's an index card on your table. What I'd like you to do with that is as you're listening and as Wendell is speaking, if questions come up that you want to have answered, go ahead and write those down and we'll pick those up and be able to ask some of those questions. Now, again, just keep the questions pertaining to what he's talking about, not like where did you get that shirt or any weird stuff like that, but things that will help move the discussion on the topic along, okay? So I want you to know that that's there as well. So as we get started this morning, the other thing I want to tell you is there's a resource table in the back. I forgot that part. We have CR here. You want to wave back there? There's our CR table. And then we've got a resource. Woo! Yes. Awesome. And then our resource table right next there, we have support group resources, some books and things like that. So feel free to peruse that as well as you get started. We also have a newcomers table kind of in the middle towards the back there. So if this is your first time and you want to get acclimated and meet some people, you can go sit there as well. And those of you that have been here a while, maybe go by and say hi to some of those folks that are new with us for the first time. So welcome. We're glad that you're here with us. So as we get started, let me just open us in a word of prayer, if I could. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this opportunity that we have to meet and talk about a topic that we know is near and dear to your heart, and that's our mental health. Because, Lord, we all have mental health. We're just at different places at different points in times, depending on what's happening to us in our lives, depending on what stories have brought us to this place. Our mental health is so important and precious to you, Lord. And we see all throughout scriptures where your heart is poured out and emotions are poured out and people's real life experiences are poured out. And so we thank you so much that you're not a God that stands off and lets us just figure it out on our own, but you love us. You've given us your word. You give us the presence of others and you give us pathways to healing. And so I just pray that you'd be with us today, that you would be in every part of what we do today, and that you would be honored and glorified at the end of the day. In your son's name we pray. Amen. Awesome. Well, we're going to have a devotional right now. So our very own Kira is going to come up and give us the devotional. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, there's a prayer table in the back. I don't want to forget those guys. Prayer. Wave right there. There we go. If you need prayer, they love to pray. Okay. So go back there and take advantage of that. Kira, come up and lead us.
Hi, it's so good to be here with all of you. A little fact about me is that before I started working in ministry, I taught kindergarten for many years, and I happened to teach a school that had Bible class, and so I got to be the Bible teacher to 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. And as you can imagine, there was many sweet memories and many funny memories, like the time that we just lit the Happy Birthday Jesus cake on fire. Every year we would make a little Happy Birthday Jesus cake. The kids, it was a big celebration, and we would light candles. And because it was Jesus, we would go all big and put every candle on. But what we didn't realize is that we had sparkler candles. And as we started to sing Happy Birthday, and do the sparklers, it just imploded. And so instead of starting to sing happy birthday to Jesus, it was, oh my gosh, Jesus' birthday cake is on fire. And so it was one of those experiences. But there were also just sweet experiences of kids just raising their hands in worship and little ones giving their lives to Christ. And I share this with you because we often lose, I miss seeing Jesus through the eyes of a child because there was a simplicity and an innocence and a gentleness that we tend to lose as adults because, life gets complicated and we tend to overthink and we tend to just make it so theological that we don't really focus on the foundation that Jesus loves us and he cares for us. So there was a verse that I used to share with the kids that would year after year would just get their attention and it would just resonate with them. And it's Luke 12:7. Why, even the hairs on your head are all numbered. Fear not. You are more value than any sparrows. Now, the part about the sparrows would go over their head a little bit, but the part about hearing the very hairs on your head are numbered would just resonate with them. And they would just, their little eyes would get so big and they would start touching their hair. And then they would just start asking questions. And they would say, wait, so Jesus knows me? He knows who I am? He knows my name? He sees me? He's with me? He cares about me? He loves me? And you know what? That doesn't change. Whether you are 5 or 95, those truths always hold true. He is always with us. So for today, for a moment, I just want you to take a deep breath and take in and receive. I'm going to say these truths again, these very simple truths. And I just want you to take them in. And I just want you to just take them in with a simple and gentleness. So he sees you. He knows your name. He is always with you. He is with you in the weeping. He is with you in the joy. He's with you when you laugh. He is with you on the hard days. And he is with you on the good days. There is never a moment that Jesus doesn't love you more than he loves you now. He is always there with you, and he loves you. So as you go along your week and things come up and get complicated, as we know that they will, just take a moment. And I know this sounds silly, but, put your hand on your head and just remember, oh, that's right. All my hairs have been numbered. He's going to be with me. He's going to take care of this. And if he cares for the sparrow, will he not care for me? So I want to have one more verse to leave with you. And it's Isaiah 43:4. Others were given in exchange for you. I traded their life for yours because you are precious to me. Let me say that again. You are precious to me. You are honored, and I love you. So friends, you know what? You never have to overcomplicate Jesus, his love for you. He is always with you. He's always caring for you. You don't need to make it difficult. Just hold on to those simple truths that he's going to love you, that he's going to take care of you, and you are more value than any sparrows. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara. That was great, isn't it? Just that reminder, right, to remember that he's with us and he'll take care of us. So we have a testimony today. We have our very own Charlie, who's going to come up and share his story with us. Come on up, Charlie.
Hey, family. I'm a follower of Christ. I'm in recovery for alcoholism, codependence, and the lingering effects of racial trauma. My name's Charlie. And I appreciate that you respected the anonymity and confidentiality by just putting up Charlie. That's one of the things that we do in Celebrate Recovery. But I will tell you, my last name is Physic, P-H-Y-S-I-C. And if you have questions, feel free to ask for Charlie Physic, okay? Make that clear. So, just as long as it's questions you ask for and not money, my kids get that. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in an East Coast, and I'm going to be reading a lot of this because I wanted to make sure I got some of the things out that I wanted to say, and I really didn't want to take a whole bunch of your time. I grew up in an East Coast university town that was considered liberal, if not radical. And I was part of a wonderful family in a great, predominantly black neighborhood, though the city was very diverse. And I remained friends with many of the folks I went to school with over 70 years ago. And that's folks of different ethnicities, racial groups, and if you would, cultural groups. The surrounding towns were not as welcoming, and often as we rode through those bicycles through those towns, we would do so rapidly for fear of the police, who seemed to be on the lookout for people of color. And I never considered trauma an aspect of what I experienced. It was just the way we grew up. It was not until getting involved in Celebrate Recovery and cultural communities that I started looking at my experiences and the way I reacted to them as traumatic events. I recognized in the latter years of grammar school and throughout high school, college, and certainly my professional years, that there were aspects of life where being a black man caused concern with the general white population. That evidenced itself in words, actions, and expectations of teachers, of employers, of coaches, as well as the behaviors of others that I encountered on the street. I also felt apart from some of my black brothers and sisters because of my features. In both instances, it was an issue of feeling apart, of feeling separate, and sometimes alone. And I compared it to being a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, always on the alert, ever vigilant, and suspicious of intent. My coping mechanisms became drinking, acquiescing, humor, and more. And I often hated myself for that. And I can also see where, on occasion, that submissive behavior and how I felt about myself because of it resulted in a more aggressive thought or action the next time, even when the situation didn't warrant it. I participate in another group and we talk about I step on somebody's toes and they retaliate. I know some of the same responses exist today, even today, and I've been in recovery for over 34 years, and those things can be exhibited by me, as I said today. And today, though I am much more aware of and controlling of my behavior, even as the triggers today are much more apparent and rapid. That rapidity and or constancy results in an always-on attitude. Always on. I'm always ready for some kind of issue, leaving little time for physical and emotional rest. I had to find places of peace and methods of quieting in order to replenish, but to replenish without denying what was going on around me. And I'll tell you that CR has created and is continuing to create safe spaces, certainly initially through Celebrate Recovery and now through a couple of initiatives, cultural communities and Native nations where people can find safe spaces to say what's happening with me, with them, without somebody saying, oh no, you shouldn't feel that way. Oh no, that's not what happened. We get to own it and tell it and feel it and work through it in safe spaces. However, I also want to say, and I'll end with this, that CR is not the end-all and be-all. It's a great, great program. However, some people need more than CR. And I would ask that you would avail yourself of those resources, whatever they might be, and still come to CR. Thank you.
Oh man, on that note, amen. Let's break. No. Thanks so much, Charlie, for sharing your story, man. Thank you so, so much. On your tables, you'll notice in your agenda, we have some table discussion questions there. So if you'd like to just turn into your table and talk about those questions there. Why do you think it's difficult for men to talk about their mental health? And what do you hope to get out of the community today? So go ahead and turn in, have that discussion, and then we'll bring you in a little bit to introduce our speaker. All right, go for it. Well, again, I'm so glad that you're here, and we have the privilege of having Wendell Moss with us. And so Wendell is a therapist, he's a minister, an educator, and a speaker. So he's a little bit busy. That's a lot of stuff right there. Wendell serves as a part of the instructional staff at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology in Seattle, Washington, where he received his Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology in 2007. Wendell has also been a core member of the Allender Center at the Seattle School's executive leadership team and teaching staff since its creation in 2010. And so, we've had Dan Allender with us. He's done some interviews. It was on Zoom, but he's been with us, and so it's great to have Wendell here live. So he's one up Dan, which is great. See, there you go. I know that's on video somewhere too, so perfect. Alongside his work with the Seattle School and the Allender Center, Wendell practices as a therapist in the Seattle area as well. So like I said, Wendell does a whole bunch of things. He is fiercely committed to engaging the impact of sexual abuse and trauma, including racial trauma. He courageously and compassionately follows Jesus into realms of healing in the most wounded places, especially the places where people are bound by relational heartache, addictions, shame, and contempt. And that's a big area, right, to go into, so it's awesome. Although he is privileged and delighted to work with both men and women, Wendell loves to create contexts of healing for men, especially African-American men. So let's give a big welcome to Wendell as he talks with us today.
Am I on? Am I just working well? All right. I don't need these at this moment. Thank you all so much. It's so good to be here. Again, Charlie. Yes, thank you. Again, I couldn't be set up better. Again, it is my honor and privilege to be here. And in this 50 minutes, I feel like there's so much I want to say and don't have time to say. So I'm feeling like I kind of have to dig in kind of quickly. And I'm also realizing that, we're here to talk about men's mental health. And I see so many of my sisters in the room. And what I hope you hear is I will be talking about the fellas, and I will be talking to you fellas, but let's be really clear, what I will be bringing, I hope, ladies, this is also for you too. So let's be really clear about that, all right? Again, honored to be here. When Kay told me about men's mental health issues, what I immediately began to think about was pictures that are often seen. Am I getting this and this? Am I? So do I need to, is that better? Okay, there we go. Okay. I thought about often how are men portrayed. I often thought about men's magazines and the imagery that men are supposed to hold. These are what men supposed to look like. And when is the last time you saw the picture of a major men's magazine, Men's Health, Men's Fitness? When is the last time you saw an image of a man who was crying? When is the last time you've seen an image of a man who was obviously scared or fearful? When is the last time you saw a man who didn't have full disability, who didn't have full ability? You don't. So often we have a culture that communicates. And what you're going to hear me talk about is we're talking about a cultural narrative that has been created. And it's been a cultural narrative that you have been invited to live into as men in your own individual story, in your own family of origin story, but also as a collective. That image is a collective. And what I mean by collective It's one thing to have a story that you hold by yourself, but it's another thing to have a story that your family holds, that your neighborhood holds, that your city holds, that the state holds, that a society holds. Do you feel the expansion of a narrative and how it can be so insidious yet powerful because it's collective? So that's what I mean by collective. In my years in working with men, it's often made me wonder when I look at those magazines and those pictures, I wonder what's behind the mask. I wonder what's behind the face. I wonder what the story is. If I took that man and closed the door and said, let's talk, let's have some real talk, what would we talk about? For me, growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, it didn't take too long I played football all my life. I'm from the fourth grade to college. And so there was something, it was easy for me to understand that I had to be tough, that I had to be strong. There was a narrative I had to live into. I learned quickly. And as an African-American male, I learned that I need to posture myself so that folks will feel safe. I learned quickly from my daddy that I needed to make white people know that I'm okay, that I'm not a thief. I need to prove that I'm educated. That's what I gotta do. So what you hear a narrative, but you hear a narrative, our narratives come with us in many ways, socioeconomically. We bring narratives that come with us ethnically. When I work with in the Allender Center, one of the things that we do Men's Recovery Week. And it's just one of my favorite times of the year. And we basically, 15 men come and we spend the whole week working with abuse issues and specifically sexual abuse issues. And during those weeks, it is outright amazing how hard these men have worked to hold these stories that have bound them, that have killed them, no matter what it's cost them. Because that's what I find. But that's me too. I'm willing to uphold an image so that you will not shame me. So that you will not think less of me. But again, that's my individual narrative, but it's also a big narrative. So as I said before, all of us live individual narratives. Everybody in this room has their own story. We all have our own stories from our family of origin. We've been shaped by families. We've been shaped by our friends. We've been shaped by conversations. We've been shaped by conversations that took a long time. We've been shaped by conversations that took seconds. We've been shaped by conversations that just involved you being called a dummy. It got in. Didn't take long. Some of us carry stories that didn't happen, that didn't go very long. But again, as I said, we also carry a broader story, especially men. Here's men's health and fitness tell you who you're supposed to be. Your airport. What's the name of the airport? John Wayne. Is that not an image that you're supposed to live under? Is that not a message? John Wayne. That's an image, the Marlboro Man. And for me, you know what's really true? Those are all white men. My face, I don't see so many people that look like me with names of airports. That's a cultural narrative. So I'm hoping I'm helping you understand a cultural narrative when a collective and an individual. I feel like I'm kind of having to move fast because I want to honor my time. Our stories shape who we are. They form our identity. Our identity is shaped by stories that are told. Many of us tell stories that we know people will receive. Many of us have read our people around us enough to, I know what story that I will tell that will get me accepted. I know the story that I will tell that will get me applause or get me approval or get me a gaze. I also know the stories that I will not tell that will get me a crazy look, that will get me a questionable one. Specifically, a story, especially for you men, a story that is counter to the image that you are supposed to uphold. Many of us won't tell those stories, but nonetheless, what I want you to hear is our identity is shaped by stories that are told and untold. So whether you tell the story or not, your body knows the story. Your mind knows the story. The way you engage with people reveals the story. How you communicate in your marriage reveals the story. And why we believe that is so important for us to understand that our identity is shaped by stories told and untold, then I believe that will help us to pay attention to the fact that we hold stories and narratives are so important to who we are, whether we want to talk about it or not. For me, I grew up, I made a vow that I would never tell my story. I had a story of abuse, of sexual abuse. And I remember as I believe I was a teenager, I remember literally saying, I will never tell that story because if I tell that story, that will mean I'm weak. That will mean I wasn't able to protect myself. That will mean this. So no. And in the back of my mind, I know the image that I'm supposed to uphold. So I will never tell that story. Well, I didn't tell the story. I kept that vow. And as a result, man, that story came out in my porn addiction. That story came out in me being a shameful little boy who grew up into a really shameful man. Do you hear? I didn't tell that story. Oh, but the story was showing up. It was being lived out. But no matter what it costs me, I won't tell it. And yet, this story is very much my identity. I believe for men, and for all of us in this room, there's a category that I want to approach with you, and that is this category of loyalty. All of us in this room have been invited, consciously and unconsciously, to be loyal to a narrative. As a man, in this country, as we've been saying all along, strong, not weak, competent. Those are narratives that we have been invited to be loyal to. Those narratives. And so out of loyalty, we actually won't say that we're hurting. And I want you to hear the word loyalty structures. Because for many of us, I don't think there was a moment where we said, I'm going to be loyal to this. The message collectively is often being, if you're not loyal to it, you'll pay. You'll be shunned. You'll be called less than. You'll be weak. So you better be loyal to this narrative. And let me talk a little bit about the narrative that we hold has been in place for centuries. And we've been invited to be loyal to these narratives for centuries. It's in us. It's in our culture to be loyal to it. Again, we have to be strong. We have to be, hear me, we have to be resilient. Now, we're not talking about a resilience, a healthy resilience. We're talking about a resilience that's actually in the name of denial. And we call it resilience. It's a denial. It's a resilience that actually means more hiding. Not being able to not only tell what happened to you, but not even allowing you to bear all that has happened to you. So you have to smash it down. I remember I had the privilege of, I don't know if you all remember the unfortunate shooting in Charleston with Dylan Roof, and Clemente Pickney was the pastor. I had the privilege of meeting with his wife, and I sat and had a conversation with her. And she was telling a story, and I asked her, I said, Jennifer, what do you do when you're having a bad day? And this strong black woman looked at me. Her mouth kind of gave a little, I don't even know what to call it, but her mouth moved slowly, and she just kind of turned her head, and she said, baby, some days all I can do is pray, but I'm okay. And I looked at her face as she said it. And I'm going, she is not okay. But what I also know, and she said it, but I got to take care of my babies. I got to take care of my daughters. So the bind that she presented was immense. But what I also saw from her, unfortunately, was that she is willing to suffer. Because there is a narrative that she feels like she must buy into. So again, ladies, it ain't just a man. And I wanted to use that as an example, again, of what the loyalty, again, that's often what resilience is supposed to look like. We're supposed to look like non-impacted. Nothing bothers us. Nothing. And let me give you a few points. Here's what that kind of loyalty, here's what it requires of you. One, that kind of loyalty is requiring your silence. It's requiring the loss of your face. What's really going on? It's requiring the loss of your voice. This type of loyalty actually bounds us. As a man, to be bound to the culture narrative is to be bound up. It's not freedom. This kind of loyalty bounds us to the secrets that we hold. It bounds us to the shame, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but it bounds us to the shame. It binds us to the contempt. And what I'm hoping I'm doing right now, I'm inviting you to consider what does your loyalty look like to this culture narrative, man? I'm hoping I'm bringing up stories. I'm hoping I'm bringing up, okay, yeah, that question. wow, how's this loyalty playing out in me? The loyalty has kept you safe, but you're paying a price. And I remember the first time, I want to say I was 20, I believe I was 23. I remember I was visiting my parents, and I was laying on my bed. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and I woke up crying. Like, what the heck? What the heck am I crying? And what was coming up in me was, in the midst of it, I was addicted to pornography, and all I knew was I felt helpless. I felt hopeless. I felt powerless. No one is to know that, by the way. And that's what's going through me. And I'm in the middle of the night, and I find myself, I'm crying. I'm like, Jesus, help me. I am stuck, and I don't know what to do. And I remember Jesus saying something that I did not like. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? Am I the only one who's... Okay. I remember Jesus saying, son, tell the truth. Middle finger. Oh, I'm sorry. We was going to do some real talk here. Hope that's okay. Jesus, are you crazy? Do you know what that's going to cost me? I just want the Spirit to go, yes. And the life that will come. Fine. And I remember that night I wrote a 4-page letter to this man who I knew had did addiction ministry. And I wrote this in tears. I wrote this letter, scared to death. He ended up writing me I wrote a 4-page letter. He wrote me a 4-page letter back. And I remember reading his response and feeling like, okay, I'm being invited to give up this loyalty. I think Jesus called me to give up of loyalty that he has not called me to. If we talk about loyalty, the problem with that loyalty structure, now hear me, we're not talking about loyalty is wrong. I'm putting it in context because we're all created to be loyal. Jesus was loyal to the Father. The Trinity is a picture of loyalty. We were created to be loyal. But one of the things that loyalty should never do, loyalty should never dismiss your face. Loyalty should never dismiss your voice. Loyalty should never degrade you. Loyalty should always be on your behalf and on the behalf of others. So that's a healthy loyalty. But this loyalty is toward narrative as a man that is inviting you to be quiet and hold the pain and go at it alone. And this kind of loyalty breeds, and Brother Todd talked about it in my bio, it breeds shame and contempt. Because to be loyal to these narratives means that you will be bound to the shame that comes with those untold stories. Shame, one of the things that shame does, shame it requires isolation. Shame often requires silence. Shame often you have to be loyal to it. you will bind yourself to it out of loyalty. And often out of shame comes contempt. One thing I will say, where there is shame, there is contempt. And where there is shame, there is contempt. Because often how we often deal with shame is contempt, self-hatred. And the problem with self-contempt is that it doesn't stay self-contempt for long. Self-contempt becomes other-centered contempt. If I show contempt for myself, I promise you, at some point, I'm coming at you. Your spouse, your children. And I hope that takes you right back to the beginning. Do you imagine the stories that are being played out as you were relating to your children in your marriage? Again, I'm hoping I'm provoking a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions in your head. So shame and contempt are two major categories that we have to engage. Again, out of shame, contempt, that's where, for me, that's why I would never tell my story. I made a vow to never tell my story. Because my addiction to pornography, that means I'm a pervert. And the church has told me I don't love Jesus. I mean, you can imagine that shame and contempt is in place to inner accusations as well as the external accusations. And after a while, unfortunately, we don't even need the external accusations anymore. For me, I no longer needed your accusation. I had enough of my own. I could build the list higher than you and add Jesus to the list of the one who hated me. So the categories that I'm hoping you've heard, those particular three, the loyalty, the shame, and contempt. And I know my time is almost up. I'm correct? I'm coming to my conclusion again. I just know that there was so much to say. Man. Okay, great. One of the things that, I'm wanting you to contemplate what stories you still have told and you haven't told. It was in, I believe, 20, I forgot what year, I think it was maybe 2000, it was maybe 2007. I remember going into the office of his name was Fred. And this was he sat down in front of me. And this was I sat down, and this is to be the first time I had ever told my full story of abuse, along with my addiction to pornography and how it had hurt my wife. And it was the first time I'd ever told a story. And I told Fred the story. I remember I got done, I paused, and this guy Fred was just kind of looking at me. And he had a smile. And I'm going, what the hell is he smiling at? And he goes, Wendell, thank you. I actually was irate at his thank you. And I said, Fred, I said, stop. Do you not hear what I just told you? Don't you sit here and thank me. Don't lie to me. Don't play with me. Don't thank me. There's no way you can sit and thank me after what I just told you. And he's silent. And I literally said, okay, I'm going to tell you again. I literally went through the story all over again. I literally went through the whole thing. daring him to say thank you again. I finished the story, and I'm giving him this look. And he's looking at me, and he goes, "Wendell, I thank you again." And I said, Fred, and I'm not embellishing. This is, I said, there's no effing way you can love me after what I just told you. Stop it. He sat up, his smile up, and he goes, "Why the hell not?" And I think for a minute I went, did he just yell at me? Like, this is not very therapeutic. But he just yelled at me. And he sat up and he just stayed there. And I'm kind of caught. I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do. What he just kind of came at me with. I don't know what to do. And I said, "Fred, I don't know what to do with it." And he goes, "I don't know what to do with you saying I can't love you. I heard everything you said the first time. I heard you when you finished the first time. I heard you the second time. My response did not change. I said, thank you." And at that moment, I began to weep. Part of the weeping was out of anger, partly because I didn't know what to do. So anger was kind of my initial response. But I think also the weeping was probably the first moment that I'd ever felt like my story was bearable. In that, I felt like for the first time that I was bearable. Because to tell that story to Fred was to risk. I knew that I was telling that story, that I was going against the imagery. The imagery that I'm supposed to uphold. I'm going against the cultural narrative that I'm supposed to hold. I went to this program upholding that image, sad to say. But it was in that moment where I experienced someone let me bring my face and actually dislodge the loyalty to the structure that had been required of me, that has stopped me from telling my story. And to have someone, another man, to look at you and go, "Yes, thank you." That was something for me. And I remember talking to him, by the time we ended this session, I mean, he was quiet and he just sit there and he let me weep. And after about 5 minutes, I said, "Jesus, maybe you don't hate me after all." Because if Fred can do that, just maybe Jesus doesn't hate my story. Because in my mind, Jesus had been doing this. He had been covering his ears. Because you're addicted to pornography, you're perverted. You don't love Jesus. You don't love me. I mean, I didn't pray beyond 30 seconds before I just got overwhelmed with this image. And so sitting there with Fred was the first time I had the image of Jesus not covering his ears. And then to have a sense of the Spirit saying, "It's so good to see you, son. It's good to see you." I mean, literally, I don't have Audible. I'm not that guy who has Audibles all the time, so don't hear. That's how I hear. That is not regular for me. But to hear, "It's good to see you, son." I was done. I was done. And I think that was that moment where I realized this is what is allowed to happen when I finally give up that loyalty structure to the culture narrative that often men feel like we have to uphold. Because what happened with Fred was, one, again, I told you, one, I felt bearable. Many of us in this room feel like we don't tell these stories because we don't feel like people can bear us. Men, we feel like other men will not bear us, but they will shame us. You have a Kleenex somewhere? I had no idea that this would happen. I shouldn't be surprised. So please forgive me. I think this is Jesus kind of going, yep, see, I told you what I was going to do. Oh, Charlie. Oh. Okay. Woo. Uh-huh. How did I come here and get caught? But it is a sense of, it is, I am glad to see you. But not only are you bearable, but I remember my body letting I remember feeling my breast deeper than I'd ever have. I actually remember feeling like not only am I bearable, but I actually have the capacity to finally engage the shame that I've come to know so well. And not only can I engage the shame, but I actually experience someone bearing it with me. For many of us men, we finally need to experience someone who will bear it with us. That's the problem. We are often, and it's warranted. Many of us have actually not experienced many men bearing it with us. Fellas, am I wrong? Well, one of the things that I'm hoping I'm doing here is I'm hoping I'm inviting you to look around the room of the men in this room. You all are hearing the same thing. So yes, I am setting you up, Todd. I hope you all will think about each other's faces in this room. Because again, many of us need to finally have someone bear us. I had just a wonderful time with Brother Rex this morning. And I told him a story of me getting to a fight with Dan. I threatened Dan as a student. I did. And I had a couple expectatives to go with. I didn't cuss a lot, y'all. I promise you, don't make it seem that way. But with Dan, he just pulled it out of me. And I finished my story. And Dan said, I got done. And he goes, "Oh, you're such a tender man. Thank you." And I said, Dan, don't you ever effing say that to me again. Ever. Because for me, I knew Bam Bam was my nickname as a kid. I was a tender boy. And I hated him. Because in my mind, it got him abused. So to have to recognize that the tenderness was still in me actually meant that, wow, I had not been able to kill Bam Bam and his tenderness. And in fact, Dan was inviting me to honor it. And it actually becomes something fierce. The tenderness was part of my story that I tried to hide. How do we move towards health? What I hope you hear is that some of us need to recognize that your body is holding the stories, whether you want to tell them or not. To recognize them is to begin to finally be able to engage them. Number two, we need to be intentional about finding spaces. Some of you, whether that be a therapist, trusted community, maybe in this room. And it's not a promo, but I know one of the things that we love to do at the Allender Center is that we do story work. We invite people to engage their stories. So would it be something like that? How will you be intentional about engaging the stories that you hold? And again, as you trust the community, prayer and discernment, yes. And in that, you finally begin to engage the shame. And for many of us, too, finally be able to engage shame, the contempt, is to finally engage the grief that our anger has covered. Anger, where there's anger, I mean, we all know that if we're honest, where there's often anger, there's fear. And my last statement, we finally get to know and understand John 8:32, that the truth does set us free. Some of us, like for me, Jesus was actually not doing this, but he's been knocking. Son, I want to touch that place in you. I want to actually be with you in that place. I'm not inviting you to just pray it out. I actually want to join you. I actually want to weep with you. I actually want to hold you. I actually want to run out to you as a prodigal father ran out. I want to meet you. Will you let me? So I know I've said a lot, but that's what I have. So right now, I believe the questions at the table. So these questions, you're actually going to 10 minutes? The 10 minutes? About 10 minutes. You're actually going to begin to, at your tables, discuss amongst yourself these two questions. These are two questions that I wanted you to ponder. And I know these are really vulnerable questions, but I'm wondering if you allow just to be a time that you would just have a taste of, to be honest. So, thank you.
I can tell by all the voices, a good discussion. Lots to think about, right? Lots to think about. And I was telling Wendell, just awesome to even have that vulnerability sort of modeled, right? I mean, just hearing just amazing stuff. So, well, we got some questions. Any of you, again, if you have any questions on the cards, put your hands up. They'll come around and pick them up for you. I've got a few already, but if you have some extra ones that came up through your discussion, we'll come and grab those, and we'll go ahead and just ask some questions. Go ahead, Rex. I'll let you start.
All right, let's get going. First question. How do we help men get past the shame they have in telling their stories, and how do we help them see vulnerability as a strength?
Okay. I think about seeing vulnerability as a strength. I think I don't think we have to actually experience it. I think number one, being able to take the risk to be vulnerable is the first thing. Because I know for me, I did not see vulnerability as a strength until I found myself developing more capacity to be vulnerable. So I think I think we can increase our capacity, but I think it has to be practiced. We have to be continue giving spaces, and I believe in that. I think we find, wow, okay, it didn't kill me. I mean, like, it didn't kill me. I'm still here. Okay, okay. And then I believe when we begin to see how it blesses us, but then what you offer to other people, then I also believe you begin to see, wow. Because for me, that I'm sitting here breaking a vow and my vulnerability, and I'm having the honor to sit here and deal with brothers like Charlie, it's a strength, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah,
hope
it
I
sure
answered the
does.
question.
You know what? Sometimes I found that when you start these kind of conversations with men, once they get going, you can't shut them up. But getting them going is really hard.
Yes.
So I'd even love to know, maybe Todd has an idea about this too, either one of you, how do you get it going with men? Because it'll be just crickets to start, right? You'll hear nothing. And they'll just sit in the silence, and the shame will rise and they'll sweat and all that. But thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I know my experience, I mean, honestly, I think in the men's groups that I've worked with over the years, I think one has had to be modeled. I think when I work with men, there's often this, I'm waiting for somebody.
Yeah.
I want to be known. We in this room, we want to be known.
So tell your story first. You're the leader, tell your story first. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's modeled, and I think it's true. We'll stare each other down, and guys have a hard time getting past that shame piece. And what are you thinking about me? And we act like we're not worried about what other people are thinking, right? We act like I don't care, but that's a front. That's another piece of that loyalty part that we've talked about before. And shame is a real thing.
It is.
It's we like to use the word embarrassment, I think, because it's a little lighter than shame, but it really is shame at the core, right?
What you had to say about loyalty structures hit me. I started going through my head, what are the loyalty structures I have? So how do you think we can help men see their current loyalties are not healthy and make it safe for them to shift loyalties to healthy?
Yeah. One of the things that I said, the few pieces I talked about, what healthy loyalty is. Again, loyalty structures, what's it doing to what it's requiring of you will often be the gauge of whether it's healthy or not. If the loyalty is requiring you to be silent, if it's requiring you to not tell the truth, then that's a good sign. It's not good. And so I think we have to recognize our unhealthy loyalty structures in order to disrupt them. Yeah. So I know for me, I had to recognize them in order to disrupt them. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So but again, that invited me to have to slow down, even in my story, and go, oh, I'm being protective because I don't want to be seen this way. And my story,
something like a loyalty structure with my father, for instance. Okay, so my father was a World War II Marine vet, but had a tender heart, could never show it. So to think about that, I mean, how do you start even in your own mind and heart with God? How do you talk about even your loyalty structure to your father?
Your loyalty structure to your father?
No, you can do therapy with me all day long if you want. No. I'm talking about how does anybody do it?
Yeah, and that's actually really hard. Loyalty structures are not broken easily because often our loyalty structures that we have, they're there for a reason. For many of us, our loyalty structures have protected us and they've kept us safe. That's just true. So they're there for a reason. But the problem is to maintain them becomes costly. So often, our parents have often your mother required you to be loyal. Your father required you to be loyal. And to break that loyalty is to essentially risk being shamed, being disowned, being put up on the outside. And so loyalty structures, that again, I wanted to say so much because loyalty structures are really tough to break. But again, to recognize them is now to then have to go, oh my gosh. To break them is often a process. It's not a one-time thing, it's often a process, especially when it comes to parents.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I think it's important to understand too how important our histories are.
Yes.
You know, when we look at mental health and we look at the different things that we're wrestling with, a diagnosis is just a point in a particular direction. Our histories are what flavor that and make that its own thing. And to not understand our histories and some of those impacts makes it difficult to really overcome those things and get past them. Well, let me ask you this, Wendell. What are the replacement loyalties that we should be pointing people towards?
Yes.
Right? Because we can talk about our bad loyalties,
Yeah.
but what should we be pointing
Yeah.
people to?
One thing I often talk about is, I'll talk about it in terms of relationships. Yeah. When I think about healthy loyalty, what I said, one, if we're talking about it relationally, that loyalty should actually benefit us both. That loyalty should invite both of our voices. It should invite both of our faces. It should invite curiosity for us both. It should not be lopsided. It should benefit us both. Does that make sense? So that's how I'll answer that in short.
Yeah. So again, though, it would benefit us both in terms of sharing that. So my voice is heard, I'm seen,
Yes.
you know, all of those kinds of
My
things.
loyalty to you, Todd, I would hope that if we're talking about loyalty,
Yeah.
that this means even if we could fight, even if we fight,
Yeah.
your loyalty is not requiring me to not say anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Because often what's really happening, often if it's lopsided, then there's probably codependency. There's a sense that if you're not okay, if you're not okay, I'm not okay. So
Yeah. Well, and that's and here's the irony in that, right? That creates a more secure relationship. There's security in that.
Yeah.
And so the very thing we fear, which is insecurity, actually is created, right? The security is created when we both show our faces. And that's an important thing for men, right? Because a lot of times it's, you know, we don't do that.
Right.
You know, it's a lot of hiding and those kinds of things. So yeah, that's very helpful. Very good.
Next question is, what types of issues do men uniquely face in the area of mental health and identity?
uniquely, that word uniquely is always often a hard word to deal with because it's almost ends up more like they may face it more, but it's not necessarily unique.
Yeah.
I think
that's
one
what's
of
hard.
the ways that I'm thinking, for instance, you mentioned, which is one of the quotes I'm going to go home and pray about. Engaging the grief our anger has covered.
Yeah.
So anger is something that's very appropriate for men in many ways, even though it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
But women don't have those same. That's unique, I think.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's definitely, even research which would say that often anger is one of the main coping mechanisms with men, and anger is often the thing that shows on surface, and again, that's why it's so important that for men, like again, to recognize that, okay, there's anger, sure, but what are you scared of? What are you fearful? So I think that would be a one that's for men. And I also, of course, even the men are more likely to take their own lives due to not being able to bear, powerlessness or helplessness, not being able to say, I need help. I'm better off leaving.
Well, and it's interesting too, because when you talk about anger is a power emotion,
Yes.
which is why, of course, for men that would be the first thing, because it's a protective emotion. It's that kind of thing. When we know that anger is usually the top of the stack, there's a lot of more vulnerable emotions underneath that guys don't like to look at. Right? Emotions are usually difficult. So let me ask you this: how would you recommend that family members talk to the men in their lives who they might think might be struggling with something or struggling with a mental health issue or something going on? How would family members sort of approach that? Because I mean, one of the hardest things is we got, as guys, we don't want to admit we have a problem most of the time. And so when our family members see something, they go, hey, there's something you probably need to take a look at here. what would you recommend in terms of how we talk to, how the family member should talk to them?
Yeah.
And don't point at the person if they're next to you. That's one way not to do it.
Do you feel it? Do you feel it?
I know. I like, don't look at them. Don't look at them.
I just
Ladies.
kinda go. Not one. I think one of the things that I think it's important to be really clear, but would you approach it with kindness? Would you approach it without shaming them? Would you, but also approach them not as like you need to deal with it, but is there a sense of we need to deal with this? Because again, the problem has been the isolation. And I think for many men to have a sense that, oh, I'm not in this by myself. I'm with you. I think often, unfortunately, even the marriages that I've worked with, there's a sense of you need to go and deal with that, which is true. There's things that the spouse may need to deal with. Yes, but there's something about you need to deal with this, and how do you want me to be with you? Does that make sense? So I think that's what feels important, and at the same time, I would say for the man, like he needs to be just as committed as well. So I think that's.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it may I would assume too, make it safe.
Yes.
Like it's not a failure, right? Doing therapy, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many guys have been dragged into the office, right? And the idea is, okay, I got them here, now you fix them, right? And so really, really important too, as family members that again, I think you shared the loyalty and the stories. We all have a story.
Oh man.
And so being willing, if I want the guy in my life, right, to make the changes in his life, I got to be willing too to say, I got a story too, right? And let me model that vulnerability in my story as opposed to saying you're a problem to fix. Because how many of you like to be told you're a problem to fix?
Yeah.
Well, if you go like, hey, I've been told it.
Well, if I can make it worse, the problem is, let's just say the husband changes. You all have had a dance that you've known together for years. If that husband changes, what is that going to require of you? If the wife changes, what's that going to require of you? You're going to disrupt, I can't tell how many people I've dealt with. I like my husband or my wife the way that they were. I knew that. I knew them that way. I'm used to that. But for them to go and get healthy, you disrupt. And often, you actually make it worse before it gets better, because now you got to learn a new dance.
Yeah, that's very
when
true.
Change happens.
Very true. Very true.
So if you want change, you're saying you want your husband and your spouse to change? Okay. What is that going to require of you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think that the big thing there is that the guy doesn't feel like he's the identified patient, but that this is a we, and it's a part of our system, right? It is a family or whoever it is, and that we love you and we care about you, and we, I like how you put that, we are going to walk through this together. That's a really important one, because remember, if shame is the number one thing, pointing out an issue can feel shameful.
Yeah.
But if the issue is we, it feels a lot.
And more. I would also say, and may the spouse not be, you're never meant to be the soul. So may the husband be encouraged to find outside people to also join them. It is the spouse is never meant to be the soul bearer. Please no. Men, do not put that on your spouses. They're never meant to bear it solely. They're your soulmate, but Jesus has given you a community. So you're all soulmate. So the spouse is never meant to be the soul bearer.
That's good. That's good.
Go ahead and start some of those stories.
Yeah, well, I was just going to, one more question I had was, what programs or approaches do you feel are most effective when it comes to, men and mental health and stuff like that? Are there particular programs or approaches? I know we talked about the approach of talking to somebody, or is that just sort of unique to whatever the issues are?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is becoming, but that's increasing, it used to be kind of a women's thing, but it's actually becoming where men are actually getting into doing body work. Because what's true is, and one of the recommended lists is the body keeps the score. That is true. The body tells the stories. And so for many men, we're not taught that we're going to have to slow down and actually feel what's in our bodies. To actually have to feel the rage. I remember watching a documentary of men in prison. And then they created this group where they set the men up to be able to bring their anger. And they made a circle, strong men, and just allow that man to rage. But it wasn't just was a, can you feel what's in your body? And and it was, so that's actually on the increase. Yeah. And Resma, My Grandmother's Hands, that's also one talk. That book is going to make you really uncomfortable because he does a lot of body work in there, and he invites men to do body work. Yeah. So I think that's a big one.
Yeah, that's good because I think for most men may not be able to identify an emotion, but we can certainly identify when our body's doing something.
You better believe it.
Yeah, I had a client like that. I remember with his wife. He said, "Okay, now you've hurt my one emotion. You've hurt my one feeling. He couldn't identify what it was, but he just knew whatever it was, it hurt, right?
Yeah.
But he certainly could feel in his body, right, when his tension was going up and the heart rate was going up and things like that. And so many times our bodies are the first clue to help us take a look inside. So yeah, that's really good stuff. Really good stuff.
And even spaces to create. Story spaces. I think is a huge piece.
Yeah, the safety in that. Well, let's get to some of your questions. I'm going to give these to you, Rex. You can take a look at those and vet those. So here's a couple questions. So is shame always a product of the devil's condemnation, or does that come from somewhere else too?
Gotcha. Let's be really clear. The devil indeed brings shame. Sure. However, the devil is not the only one. For many of us, if we look at our stories, we know shame from our family of origin. We know shame from our parents. We know shame. So shame actually comes often from the people we love. The people that actually have been who are for us. So I wish I could always blame shame on the devil, but that would be wrong.
Does shame ever serve a good purpose in our lives? That's a question I'm going to ask. Very good question.
Yes, that's always a question. Is it a serve a good purpose? Yeah. And it's often a hard question to answer. So my sense is that if we stick with the word shame, and the shame is inviting you to a movement, to a healing process, if it's making you mobile towards healing, but then there's a sense of a shame that petrifies, that stops you, that actually makes a claim on your character. You're nothing. That kind of shame, I think we know clearly. But I think shame. It can be helpful. The problem is most often the way it's used, it's not.
Yeah, I always thought of it as shame. The difference between guilt and shame. Shame is person based, more guilt. Identity, right? You're a bad thing, and guilt is I did a bad thing.
Something wrong.
And I think guilt's probably more healthy than shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, if I'm feeling shame though, and that's a motivator towards change, right?
Yeah.
So my feeling shame is my emotion. You putting shame on me is not healthy or effective, because you're basically shaming my personhood, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know about you, but my mom always would say, "Shame on you," when I did something wrong. And I realized later the Bible never says that. That I can know of. It never tells us to feel. Actually, it says I sent Jesus so you wouldn't carry shame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming off a little bit about what you were talking about, can you please elaborate on the relationship between grief, fear, and anger?
Grief, fear, and anger. Yeah. Again, when I feel angry, for me, that is often me sticking my chest out. But in the end, often internally, I'm either deflated, I'm feeling powerless or helpless, because often anger I always wonder, where's their powerlessness? Where's their helplessness? And so anger is often a response that I won't be helpless. I won't be, So often I think, and anger actually often keeps you from grief. Anger often doesn't allow grief. And a lot of times we actually act out anger in order to avoid grief, because grief will actually invite you to actually really have to consider your story, what's happening, the pain, the powerlessness, the helplessness. Just for men, to grieve is actually have to help you engage where you feel deflated, where you don't feel like you can make change, where you feel incompetent. Yeah.
Is fear also what is the relationship with fear? Because fear is a more core emotion that drives other things, anxiety, shame, guilt. Talk about that a little bit, because that is something I think men have a very difficult time admitting.
That they're fearful. Yeah, I mean, again, the narrative is what? First of all, you're not supposed to fear anything. I remember my father like putting me back in the face of a kid who was clearly bigger than me. And he would have killed me. I mean, it's like, you are not going to be scared of him. Wow. That was the message. And so fear actually means, again, you're incompetent. You're weak. Fear is not talked about in a biblical way that, where's fear warranted? Was I scared of that kid? He was huge. Of course I'm going to be scared of him. That was actually, sometimes fear can be smart.
Yeah, there's fight or flight for a reason.
Yeah, I mean,
our body helps us with that one too.
Yeah. So again, I think anger. I think for men to have to be able to slow down enough to go, okay, I'm angry. Where's the anger coming from? And again, is there fear? And fear actually, because fear is demonized. Because we can be scared, but it doesn't mean we're immobilized. Because a lot of times we have to do things while we're scared. And can we even admit, I'm doing something and I am scared? And amen.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, and I think too, like when you talk about grief, I think, we're a lot of times we're afraid to open up grief because we feel it'll never end. Right?
Well said.
So it's just never going to end. When the reality is we go through grief, not around grief, right? It's not if you grieve, it's when you grieve.
Well said.
And those protective systems, right, of anger and all that kind of stuff keep us from getting to where we need to get to. And boy, I tell you, if you've ever been through any kind of grief process, right, and if you're going through that, the freedom on the other side, helping guys understand the freedom that comes on the other side of that, right? I know Charlie would say amen to that one too, right? The freedom that comes on that side is incredible. So,
and one thing I talk about this a lot of times, do you want to go into the Garden of Gethsemane? Jesus was grieving. Please take this cup away from me. I don't want to do this. So we have a Jesus who modeled fear on the cross. Why have you forsaken me? Oh my goodness, I don't know if I want. So we model a Savior who grieved, who was scared. So me, I'm like, okay, we have a Savior who models this. Because a lot of times we make Jesus John Wayne.
Very true. Yep. Other than the turn the other cheek part. Another question here: Does today's women make it more difficult for a man to be themselves rather than the cover of a magazine? So, are there any influences from women that would cause that?
I don't know why it feels like a trap.
That does feel like a trap.
I'm like,
so I'm asking you. I'm not, Next. No. That is a tricky one. I was like, man, I should have read that one closer.
I don't. I mean,
That's a tough one. Don't do it. Don't do it. Everyone's like, don't do it.
am I the only 8 up here? I think I'm
No. I will say this. I think in some cases I'll say from both sides of the aisle. From the guy's side of the aisle, there's the illusion that's the case, right?
true.
In
That
many
feels
cases,
much
right? There's the illusion that's the case. And again, I think perceptions are really important in all this.
Oh, yeah.
And we live by perception, and we live by those societal loyalties that say this is the ideal whatever.
Yeah.
There's ideal women and there's the ideal man. And I don't know who they are, but they're not real,
Yeah.
right? They're not real.
But I think we also have to be aware of what's happening when the first thing we can do is blame.
Yeah, that's right.
Like if that's your only movement to blame, how come? Because again, we saw in the Garden of Eden, that's what happened, blame. Yeah. And we all know, we've all lived long enough to know that it takes 2 to tango or more. It ain't just her.
That's right.
I wish my wife would be going, yes.
Yeah, that's right. I think we did pretty good on that one. I think we did all right. Everybody's still
Yeah.
smiling. It looks all right. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Oh my God. Do I look stupid?
Yeah,
But I try. I don't know. That's what happened. You got any answers, right?
No, I'm out.
Just one more here. When you see a man suffering, how do we approach them to talk to them about what's going on, especially if they're closed off? So you see them suffering, but they're closed off.
Yeah.
How do you enter into that?
Yeah, and it's complex because often most people are not going to let down their defenses easily. And so a lot of times it's going to take patience. Again, our defensive structures are up for a reason. They have been created, they've kept us safe. And so in some ways I would be a fool to knock them down quickly, to let you in. So I think we have to hold our expectations of what we think they should be. Because a lot of times you gotta honor, when I work with a client, I honor resistance. I don't bowl over it. Their resistance is there for a reason. And for me to bowl it down, to knock it down, is really to dishonor them. And so I have to honor their resistance, why they don't want to say something, why they didn't want to go somewhere. Because that's how you begin, because then they're able to go, okay, you're allowing me to trust you. You're honoring my resistance. Okay, so now I get to talk about my resistance. Because you get to finally talk with that man about why he's resistant. Yeah. So, and that takes time. So expectations are huge. You're not going to just go through. And for you to expect it to, that would be dishonoring to that man. To expect him to just tell you. No.
That's a really good point, because when you're trying to help somebody, you have to remember, is this on my timetable or theirs? If it's on mine, then it's because I have an agenda, and I'm probably not going to be helpful to the process because I'm going to want them to perform the way I want them to on my time.
I've done good. I got them to be honest. That says something good about the work that I've done. Yeah. Because I got them to be honest. That's about me. That's not about them. Yeah. So well said.
Yeah, that's right. So just being a safe person, and safety comes with just consistency and allowing, I like how you said that, just allowing them to have resistance and honoring that resistance. Because then eventually they'll talk about the resistance, and then maybe you'll talk about what's behind it. But it definitely takes time. It takes time for anybody.
It does.
So
You talked about safe places
a
little bit. And I'm envisioning, especially sometimes our spouse or our parent is the most unsafe person. But what we tend to see, the problem's here, so let's deal with it directly. Sometimes the safe place is elsewhere. So talk to me a little bit about, what are the safe places?
Yeah. I think a lot of times, I need someone outside of me, outside of my relationship with my spouse or whatever, to help me to see what me and my spouse would not see. So I think it's often, for me, it just requires someone who is not here, but they actually can see from the outside. I think that's why it's really helpful to have people come in from the outside to help. Again, we were created to be engaged in community. We were created to need one another. So am I
Yep,
answering your question?
That's great. That's fantastic.
So yeah, me to just deal with it. If I'm just dealing between me and my wife, we're gonna keep going bouncing back and forth because I have my perception, she has hers, and we're gonna go boom, 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 boom. She's wrong. I know she's wrong. She's saying the same thing, and we need somebody to go stop it. Both of y'all wrong. I mean, but someone to go.
So an objective
Yeah.
third party. They need to be like outside the family, outside the, yeah.
Often that's just really the case.
Well, and this is why we have things like CR,
Yes.
our support groups.
Yes.
That we have. I mean, our support groups. This is why we do this.
Yeah.
You know, it's because community is so valuable to hear another person say something
Mm-hmm.
like you're not crazy. You know?
Yes.
And then you are a little crazy too. So and we'll work on that. We'll work on that together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you so much, Wendell, for being here with us today, and thank all you guys for coming. Just a couple of things as we wrap up. Again, we've got prayer in the back. If you need prayer, we've got an awesome prayer team, so definitely go over there. We've got some resources at the back table. CR's back there, as well as some of our other resources. Next month, right, fourth Sunday of the month, next month we have Kurt Roundson coming. He deals with trauma, and he'll be talking about EMDR. I don't know if you've heard of EMDR before, but yeah, really a really good process of working with trauma. Again, just understand how amazing this is to get him. We've been after him for a long time, and so the fact that we've been able to get him is really huge. So you don't want to miss that one. That's going to be really important, especially with all of the talk about trauma in our society. So we have him coming, and then I think do we have the next? It's the fourth Sunday in August. So 28th. There you go. August 28th, he'll be here. And then we have Kayla coming as well in September. And so she'll be here to talk with us as well when we come in September. And so good. We even got a picture and everything out there. And so she's an author and an advocate. And again, will be a really, really good talking about the topic of suicide, I believe, because it's Suicide Prevention Month. And so we'll be talking about that in that month. So those are the couple of things coming up. Again, remember, fourth Sunday of the month. Next time will most likely be, again, back in this room or upstairs. Just want to let you know that because they're still doing construction in tent 3. So any of you that took the wandering over there to think we were in there going, what in the world happened over here? That's what's happening over there. They're doing some of that remodeling work in there. All right. Well, before we go, can I pray with us before we go? Let me pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this time that we could have today to talk about this topic of men's mental health and our stories and loyalty and just all the amazing things that were brought, Lord. Again, every single one of us comes with a history. None of these things that we wrestle with happens in a vacuum, Lord. And I thank you so much for just the reminder again of respecting those stories and understanding those stories and the things that are happening for us, Lord, and how to approach the men in our life with any issues or things that are coming up related to mental health. So just thank you for the blessing this has been. I pray that you would just be with each and every one of us as we live our lives, Lord. Each of us has unique struggles. I pray that you would meet us in that place and that we would see and experience you there, Lord. And that you would just, again, we would experience that. I'm so glad to see you, son or daughter, Lord. That would just is just an amazing thing. So thank you that we have that in you, and just pray your blessing on everyone as we leave here. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. Thanks, you guys. Have a good one. Take care.